Okay, I've got 201. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I'm Carrie Kissel with the National Association of Development Organizations, or NATO, and we're really pleased that you are all logged in today for this workshop, GTFS, Stepping Up with Trip Plan Data Management for your rural and tribal transit managers. Let's do this. Just a very quick introduction. Today's webinar, as well as the whole workshop series, is a partnership through technical assistance on rural transportation that is supported through USDA Rural Development. And this technical assistance is offered through a three-way organization partnership at the moment. From the NATO Research Foundation, I am part of that technical assistance team, along with Rachel Byerly. We also have several folks from Montana State University's Western Transportation Institute who are joining us today. In particular, you might notice Natalie Vilwalkwitty, Andrea Hamry, and Carolyn Klauser's names in the participant box if you've been working with any of them on technical assistance. And we're really grateful to National RTAP for leading the development of today's workshop and the GTFS series. So thank you so much to Nancy and Marcy for pulling all this together. We're really excited to get going. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nancy.
Thanks so much, Carrie. Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to this first training on GTFS, or General Transit Feed Specifications. I'm Nancy Doherty. I'm an analyst with National RTAP. It's our goal that this training gives you a really good overview of GTFS and a free tool called GTFS Builder, which is offered by National RTAP. GTFS Builder allows one to easily create GTFS data suitable for publishing on a trip planner, such as Google Maps, Apple Maps, and others. As a reminder, our next session is scheduled for next Thursday, May 20th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And during that second session, we will really dig in and help you actually create GTFS data for at least one route, probably just one route. Of course, our final session is June 3rd. On that day, that's an optional session. It's kind of like office hours. Marcy, our instructor, will be available for those that have questions and for interested agencies to support each other and network a little bit around learning GTFS. But let's first start with a few housekeeping slides on how to use and participate in a Zoom meeting. Oops, Marcy, that looks fine, thank you. That's the meeting code. And these are the phone numbers. So you can use your computer or you can call in using the number shown on the screen. You will also need to enter the ID shown here if you call in. And if you have any issues with audio, let us know in the chat and we'll do our best to assist you. Next slide. So this is a meeting and not a webinar, just basically to encourage participation. However, for the first part of the training, we will keep you in mute, or we encourage you to stay in mute if you could. So if you do have a question, maybe you can reach out to us using the chat box. We will monitor that for any questions. And then later in the presentation, it'll go to more of an interactive session. The meeting slides and a recording of the meeting will be posted at the National RTAP website, which is nationalrtap.org, about a week from today. Next slide, Marcy. So this is today's agenda. And again, in this first session, we're going to give you, provide you with more of an overview of GTFS, what it is, why it's worth doing, and suggest a few ways you can make it happen for you or your transit partners. In the second session, as I mentioned, we'll be working together to actually develop GTFS data for a single route. And again, in the last session, we'll be available for support and some networking. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about National RTAP, introduce our speakers, and Carrie's going to tell you a little bit more about NATO. So we have three speakers today. Carrie Kissel serves as the Associate Director for the NATO Research Foundation's Transportation Research and Capacity Building Programs, RPO America, and Wealth Creation, as well as other economic development work. In this position, she provides technical assistance and develops and implements trainings. She also conducts frequent outreach to rural and small metro transportation and development organizations or practitioners. I've heard her speak as a keynote speaker at a national conference, and she's amazing, and we're really glad that she helped us organize this training for all of you. Marcy Jaffe supports and guides rural, tribal, and intercity transit partners with technical assistance related to GTFS and National RTAP's GTFS Builder. Marcy is a lifelong, enthusiastic proponent of all things GTFS and has conducted many in-person and I think some virtual GTFS trainings. And then finally, Jared Tremblay. He's a project manager for the Flint Mill Regional Planning Organization in Kansas. The Flint Mills RPO serves Kansas State University. He is one of only 2 staffers for this regional planning organization. Jared started his career with the city of Manhattan, Kansas as a GIS technician and later as their infrastructure analyst. Earlier this year, with Jared's passion for and promotion of walking and biking, Jared was awarded by the Governor's Council on Fitness as the 2021 Kansas Health Champion. Hey, Jared, nice job. So welcome all of you. Next slide. So just a real quick overview of the National Rural Transit Assistance Program. For those of you that are not familiar with us, we are a technical assistance center funded by the FTA or the Federal Transit Administration under the Section 5311 program. Our mission is to address the training and technical assistance needs of rural and tribal transit operators across the nation and to support state RTAP programs. So there's federal and state RTAP programs. We're at the federal level. When life is more normal, we of course travel around the country to transit conferences offering our resources and training materials. And I hope that resumes soon. We are located outside of Boston, where I am is outside of Boston. And we do have staff in an office in the DC area. We're guided by a review board consisting of transit and state RTAP managers. So Carrie, at this point, would you like to tell our attendees about the work that NATO does?
Sure, I'd be happy to give a little background. You'll advance to the next slide for me. So NATO is, thank you. NATO is a national association that's focused on capacity building for regional planning and economic development organizations, which exist in most states across the US and serve a multi-county region, doing a variety of kinds of functions that usually include regional economic development planning, and in a lot of places also includes rural transportation planning and other kinds of support around transportation. So at the national level, our work includes advocacy and promoting public policies that are supportive of efforts that support our members' work at the regional level as well as the local governments. And we also do capacity building through the NATO Research Foundation, largely using federal funding sources and some other funding pots and fee for service to develop resources, information, and technical assistance and training around rural and small metro transportation, economic development planning, and other areas that our members are focused on. This work through the USDA Technical Assistance Program with National RTAP and the Western Transportation Institute is part of our portfolio. We have a lot of resources I wanted to point out on our website, ruraltransportation.org, in case you are looking for any more rural transportation resources.
Marcy, I invite you to begin.
Our goal today is to answer the question, what is GTFS and why develop our GTFS data? The GTFS comes in various flavors or types, and you'll hear these terms, and we'd like you to be familiar with those. Many agencies want to jump in and put a device on their bus and offer real-time GTFS and ignore this first step, which we'll be discussing today, which is our focus on static GTFS, general transit feed specification that includes the timetables and stop locations that your agency publishes on your website. In the center of this slide, you can see a real-time display where this bus is running a minute early, and that is very helpful, but you can't compare real-time information if you don't have the scheduled service. So unfortunately, you can't jump the line with real time. The last of our flavors or types of GTFS include Flex GTFS. This is under development, there are tests underway, and the goal would be a Lyft or Uber-like service where a rider could go into a service area, say, I want to go here to there, and their local social service providers, their community action programs, their senior centers that sign up with GTFS Flex would also display for riders to consider and take trips, maybe even schedule those trips online using that future GTFS Flex. In this display, we just want you to be aware that the data you're providing will publish in a variety of different ways. You're not going to need to develop these flavors or types of display. They're already standing ready for your data. On the left, we show Apple Maps for the same 150-mile trip as what we see on the right on a Google map. The different agencies and their icons are displayed, which route a traveler would need to take. And now let's jump in and actually see some of the details of a trip plan and view how the rider will learn that the bus is actually only going to cost about $2 to go 150 miles. And it takes just a moment for this to load up. Which exact route they're on. Maybe that route name changes as they travel, and the rider would need to not worry about that because it's all sitting inside of this data set. Whether there's a scheduled holiday or not, the rider doesn't need to be concerned. Is this bus stop accessible? They can see that on the trip plan. Where do they stand and wait? They might have some time at the Mercantile in Amanda Park to support that local economy. If a rider wants to see all of the bus stops along the way, just click another click and the time and location where they should be traveling as they're moving forward can also reassure a rider that they're going in the right direction. In this particular portion of the trip, there are some delays due to some summer construction. And again, we can layer that on top of our GTFS data and give riders the best and most consistent rider experience. I happen to know ahead that it was $2, but if I scroll down, I could see that and who the operators are. If I wanted to buy my mobile ticket ahead, if I might get a discount by doing that, there's a click right there from the trip plan into ticket information. And lastly, were anything to get lost, you might need to call in, and that's always very helpful as well. Title VI is an area that we know is a mandate to help riders so that they can travel and have language available to them, familiar to them. And what we've been able to show you here once it loads is that the rider who's familiar with Spanish or another language can see trip planning in their language. And it may be a little bit small on the screen, but I promise you this would help someone who isn't as familiar with English as a first language. Maybe low English proficiency in Title VI can be supported also by your GTFS data. The last, because it's exciting for me to show that languages go beyond maybe English and Spanish, this display is in Thai language. And I'm always intrigued by being able to see how much of the language gets translated. So even the places that we're trying to go are flipped on into another language. So we've now made available pretty much an international marketing department for your agency, and you can now sit back and allow riders to find you where they might not have been able to find you by just surfing to your website. We have a question in our poll, and we'd like you to consider answering for us. Have you planned a transit trip using a trip planner before? Thank you for filling this out. And it looks like most of you have answered. Some of you may have stepped away from your computers, so here we go. Look at that. We have about an equal mix of people that have planned some trips and no, not yet. So I think we can share those results. Were you able to see them? Okay. I couldn't see the share results, but I think we're good to go that some people have, some people haven't, and we'll look forward to more success with online trip planning now that you're more familiar. The possibilities are limitless with standardized data. For example, on this website, there are many, many different trip planners and tools and ways in which people who have limited vision or limited sight can have this displayed more easily for them. You don't need to hire 15 or 20 different programmers or whole companies to develop these tools for you. The standardized data will allow your data to be displayed at each of these toolkits, and we've made this available on our links for today if you'd like to explore this a little bit more. Regional planning, where you can display the routes and the trips and variations, might also benefit from having standardized data. So we'll look forward to seeing what you can do with your data into the future as you're planning using the data set. The third area that we'd like you to be familiar with is a national transit map. The goal will be that each of those bubbles on the map are green and not white and open, and we're here to help. The Bureau of Transportation Statistics is ready to receive your data once it's standardized in GTFS. So please learn more about the National Transit Map. Next, we'll talk with Jared Tremblay. He is our success story. He's been working on GTFS for, is it roughly 4 years, Jared? 3 years? You're unmuted and join us.
Yep, 3.
3 years, fantastic. And we're curious, were you motivated personally, or did the agency come running to your door at the regional agency asking for online trip planning?
So in 2018, the agency, we were working with them to redesign their network, a complete relaunch of everything. I'd used Google Maps and Trip Planner before, so I was excited about it. The agency had actually hired someone previously to work on this. They were a programming student at the university here, but they graduated and nothing ever happened. So I looked at the national RTAP, you know, the how-to pages and the videos, and I thought, I think I can do this. I'm a GIS professional, so I understand mapping pretty well. Yeah, so I told them I thought I could do it, and they let me try it, and it worked great. We were able to align the whole process with the relaunch of the system, and so, yeah, that's how I got involved.
Fantastic. I know you had to do this as a side project because very rarely as a regional planner is someone given a chance to dedicate their time. Do you have any rough idea on how many weeks or months you felt you committed to develop maybe 4 routes, 5 routes?
Yeah, so we did 3 in one city, 1 halfway in between, and then actually about 8 separate routes in another city. I would say the time frame for the mapping was relatively quick, and the schedule timing, you know, we were building those processes. I would say overall, it was a several month process, the longest part being working with Google, but actually doing the work from start to finish was probably a month to 6 weeks working with RTAP and getting everything down pat.
Fantastic. Could you tell us any of the stumbling blocks? Did you happen to have bus stops available to you because of some of the work you had been doing to develop the future route plans, or did you have to gather those bus stops?
So we were developing those. So we had the latitude and longitude, the XYs, based upon the planning work we were doing in one city. In the other city, the stops were already there. And so being a GIS person, I just mapped them out in GIS, also in Google Earth as well. I mapped some of those for quicker XY coordinates. So we had that data available. We worked with the Public Works Department on the new routes. So, you know, I would put it in one place where I thought it would be great. The agency would say, yes, that will work for us. And then we would go to Public Works and they would say, yes, that will work, or no, we already have a sign there, or there's some sort of visual issue or whatnot. So we would alter it, and then I would have to move it in the GIS. as well. So there really weren't any stumbling blocks for us since we had the data. It's point data. It's very simple. It's the name of the stop and then the X and the Y. There's not a lot of metadata with it.
And it's that little bit of back and forth that not everybody realizes. Sometimes when you're looking at this data, you might find a little gremlin in there, a typo or an inconsistent stop that's no longer in use. And I think what I was hearing is by going through this data in this detailed way, maybe with your fresh eyes, some of those little challenges disappeared. So I'm going to show one more slide here for you, Jared. And the questions really are, have you seen benefit? Are the riders able to give any feedback all the way back up to you? Because you're not at the other end of the phone at dispatch, but are you hearing anything from ATA?
Yeah, it's been great. We're a university town, so we have a lot of people that are used to using their phones for everything. We're not a huge community. We're 55,000 in one city and 25,000 in the other, but we do get a lot of use on it. From the agency themselves, they're very happy. I mean, in reality, the GTFS feed on Google Maps has become basically the standard that everyone is using, even internally. The company or the server software that they use to actually, track required on time, this and that, and all these certain things. They have these manifests where the driver's information is in there and the trip information. It's a lot more clunky. So someone will often call in to the agency and say, I'm here, how do I get to there? And they will use the GTFS on Google Maps to instantly tell them what to do. The other thing we've really noticed is that, well, we've all just lived through COVID, but we have a lot of construction like everywhere, specifically May through August when the students aren't here. We try to get all of our construction in. It doesn't work that way, but that's what we try to do. So routes are constantly changing. And so even though we have signage out at the stops, that's not always accurate. And so we're able to update the GTFS to reflect changes that we just simply don't have the time to update in the field itself. We can't go out to every stop and put a sign up every time something changes or a road closes, but we're able to do that in the GTFS if we have a day or two advance warning. So it's been very helpful. We're still maintaining it, and yep.
So speaking of data maintenance, and we're going to try to just think of a perfect world where COVID isn't juggling everything all the time. What do you estimate you were spending those first 2-3 years before COVID to keep the data up to date?
Minimal, 10 to 20 hours a year, I would say. I mean, once the data is in there, we programmed it out for, I think, 1.5 years. So we started the routes in August. So it went through the end of that year of 18. And then we programmed all the dates and holidays and all the timing through the entire year of 2019. So again, the only updates I had to do were if there were a minor error here and there, something needed to be altered or changed. And then again, construction, we would go in. So it was fairly minor once you get it set up.
Fantastic. Don't mean to cut you off. Would there be any other life experiences or reasons why you'd like to share with others what you've learned and encourage them or help them not stumble?
I just want to say you can do it. I mean, if I can do it, you can do it. It's actually very simple and systematic. You just need to watch the videos, talk with RTAP. Once you get an idea of how everything fits together, which takes a little time, once you get that, there's logical rules. It's very simple. So you can do it.
We appreciate that encouragement. And Nancy, any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Jared, thank you for making that point that this is, GTFS Builder is a very simple spreadsheet to use. You just fill in the tab one at a time, and you get great support from Marcy or from any of us at National RTAP. Yep. So if you decide to go forward, we'll be there in your corner for sure.
Yep. And I'm available for questions anytime if anybody has.
Thank you for that.
Yep.
We have leaned on you a few times, so thank you so much. Fantastic. So Jared will be available at the end if there are any questions in chat. And now let's dive in and take it a little bit further. Behind this link is a list of possible outside contractors that you could hire. We want to be certain that you know while we're encouraging a GTFS builder solution, there may be other ways to get to the goal, and the goal really is to have your standardized data. So you would be paying someone else to say, where is this bus stop? And then they put it on the map, and then they don't quite put it on the map right. And then you tell them to move it, and then you work back and forth with an outside contractor. And not to say that that is a difficult process, but you're encouraging them to take the data you have and put them into their version of a spreadsheet. Another option that might generate GTFS is to partner with you at the regional level, or maybe there's a state level staff that is involved in GIS, like Jared mentioned he was, and they could support your agency's initiative in GTFS. We're not sure there's a lot of those free support out there, but we are encouraging you as a partner to a local agency to help build this data set, because sometimes those agencies are really very, very lean, as Jared has learned. And while he didn't have the skill set in the beginning, in the range of 10 hours a year, he can now support his local agency with something that the students at K-State really appreciate. Our third option is National RTAP's GTFS Builder. So let's find out what we need from GTFS Builder. A computer. And that computer needs to be in a PC or Mac in Parallels or boot camp mode. The Google Earth needs to be loaded on that computer, and it's the desktop version, Google Earth Pro as desktop version. And you'll be using Google My Maps, so you'll need a Google account to access that and generate some stops or the shapes lines using My Maps.
Marcy, just to reiterate that Google Earth Pro, the desktop version, that's a free application you can download.
Thank you. Yes. Beside owning a computer that costs a little bit of money, and purchasing Excel, which also is not a free, along with our GTFS Builder, the other tools are at no cost. Thank you. And we need that export, we need that Excel file to be using macros. So you might need to check with your technology team at your agency in order to affirm and allow you to run the macros that we use so that the scripts will generate the files that you need.
Marcy, I just want to say we will be sending you those two files, the import, export, and schedule generator spreadsheets. That's what comprises GTFS Builder. We'll be sending you that next week, early next week, as well as the guidebook that accompanies the spreadsheets.
Fantastic.
Yep.
So for me, a willingness to learn may be more important than the skills, but if you're going to be thinking inside of your team, who might be the best? Someone who has a familiarity with Microsoft would be great. Can you enter some data, add a row, fill down? And if you haven't done any of those specific things, if you're willing to learn, we'll help you. Google My Maps is a new tool that's been recently available. None of us were that familiar with it when we started, so you'll learn as you go, and we'll be there to help you. Google Earth can be a little bit challenging in the beginning. Sometimes it kind of stutters along, but if you slow down, like everything in life, take it at the right pace, you'll become an expert. And we do estimate, while we don't know how many exact stops you might have for a long distance route, it could be maybe 3 to 4 hours for you to generate your first route. So as you go, as Jared mentioned, it gets a lot easier. There's a little moment when everything just clicks. And once that logical process and the click flips on, you will be thrilled, and we will be too, because it rolls right after that. So let's add a little bit to our knowledge here and go to our next question, which is your familiarity with Excel. If you could take a moment and just help us. We're coming in rather quickly here, and the overwhelming so far is that most people are familiar with Excel. So I appreciate that we've got most of our questions answered, and I'm sharing the results. So thankfully you are good to go. Everyone here is almost an expert ready for taking on a GTFS builder project. I missed a slide. Thank you. So what would that GTFS data really look like inside of an Excel spreadsheet? So here you are staring at what you will need to fill in. We are going to send you, as Nancy mentioned, both sample data and a blank screen with these rows and columns, and your guidebook will help you answer how to generate your internal agency ID, how to fill in your agency name, the URL, the website. The time zone does look a little bit funny, but this is the format that's used for standardized data.
So this is, Marcy, this is the import export file, and it's showing all the tabs, some of which you absolutely need to fill in and some are optional. Like she said, she's showing you the agency one. That's all you need to put in on that one tab. Really, really simple. And we'll be digging in much more detail next week, but we do want to just kind of give you an overview of what these spreadsheets look like.
We want to take the fear out of it. So
Yeah.
Here's a next slide. Of the roughly 6 that you'll need as a required set of tabs, here is the route tab. And in the routes tab, you're filling in what is the route and then the color. So when we were able to see a bright pink color on a map, it's because we've identified what that color is. And this links back to the agency's URL so a rider could learn more about this particular route. The second in this series here is the latitude and longitude. And Jared mentioned he had to go out in the field in some cases or at the desk using Google Earth, or now with Google My Maps, you're literally clicking on the map and developing your latitude, longitude. The third here is the feed info tab. And this just helps to set which version of this data am I publishing right now. Sometimes you think you published what you wanted and it hasn't quite gone live, and how to reach back to an agency if there are questions. I'm hoping all of you are nodding your heads up and down. This is something I can do. And so we really wanted to take the veil away that GTFS is some crazy esoteric thing. It's data that you already have. And here's another example of data that you already have. The trip plan data for your schedules is entered in a separate schedule generator file. And the times that are timetables on your website are entered, and you fill in each of those. And when you don't know a time between stops, you'll put in a star. If operations wants to tell you the exact minute and second when you fill in between those time locations in those 9 non-time stops, you'll be able to do that. This data gets generated out of the schedule generator file and melded into, merged into, copied into the import export workbook, the other workbook that we were looking at, in order for the final GTFS file to be generated. So in some cases, we might have a staff person who's expert on the schedule information and doesn't really want to think about colors or the calendar or the agency URL. And we can parse up and allow this to be a team effort, and experts who know what they're doing in certain areas can supply that information. We were ready for our next poll, and let me get back to that. Because part of our data includes the gathering of latitude and longitude, have you—
Of the bus stops, right? The longitude of each bus stop on the route.
Each of the bus stops, thank you. Have you ever needed to or been inspired to collect some GPS coordinates, global positioning coordinates, latitude and longitude for anything before? Now we've got a chance to show that some of us are going to be new to learning how to do latitude and longitude, and it will just be a few clicks on a map, and others are more expert. So I think we'll close the poll now, and apologies if anybody really wants to see what we have, but about a third of us would say, yes, it's easy, and about 50% will get a chance to learn some new skills. So thank you for that. And actually, there's a handful here said it was challenging. So we'll do all that we can to make sure that the challenge and discomfort that went along with prior effort gets notched down, because the tools really do get better as we move forward. National RTAP, as Nancy had mentioned, is going to send you a guidebook. It's a very detailed guidebook. It may be intimidating because there are so many pages, but the very good part is through its table of contents, you'll just flip to the page where you can spend 5 or 10 minutes finishing off a section, and we give you a checklist so that you can go through the process of entering your data and knowing where you are in the process.
Marcy, I just want to reiterate, yes, it's 40 some pages long, but you are not in any way expected to read the whole thing. It's just, it's a reference manual. If you have a topic that you're a little stuck on, you need a little more information, you can go to that guidebook that references that particular tab and get the information you need. And the guidebook will also provide links to some more detailed information through videos that Marcy's in the process of creating. So, thank you.
In developing your data, there are sometimes timelines if you've agreed to publish at Google Maps, for example, and they ask that you can upload at least a valid data set within 14 days of signing the agreement. And that can make people very nervous because, as Jared said, it starts out as 3 or 4 routes, but then there might be variations. There may be more routes that creep into the data set. So make sure that as you're ready to sign up and publish your data, you have 1 route completed. We estimate that to be about 4 hours. And then you start testing that data. And while you're testing that data, you can identify any concerns. You're up in a test environment with Google Maps and you're completing more routes. And then once you've been successful and feel that the routes are as you expect them, you request from Google a chance to review the final data set. And that can be, a couple of months back and forth. Even the shade of the color of pink will really need to be exact to your website. We've spent many too many hours on things like that. So we encourage you to review your guidebook and follow our instruction to save yourself time in the test and quality assurance review. National RTAP offers a set of files that we're going to be sending to you. There will be 4 files, a blank and sample data, as we mentioned, and also a service that has become important for many agencies is that we can host your file. And what that means is any of the data users that we mentioned earlier, all those different apps on that list, won't be emailing you one by one saying, have you made any changes? How is that data? Where is it? Can I get a copy? You'll be able to publish at a stable URL through the National RTAP website. And that link will be on your website or at a feed registry so that anytime you update your data, you just correct it once and upload it to the National RTAP website. And then that stable URL saves everyone time and they don't have to ask you for a copy of your files.
So Marcy, I just want to jump in real quick. So the file that you will upload are text files that are generated when you're done with your import-export file. The text files are through a macro created through that spreadsheet. And that is what, if you would like, we'd be happy to host for you for free on our website.
Thank you, Nancy. It is a very tiny little text file. That's our goal. And what slows us often down is something called a license agreement. And thankfully, there are a variety of agencies or services out there, and some of them have a very informal agreement where they just ask, can we go to that URL where you've published your data and keep it up to date? And can we publish onto our app or map your data? And that informal process is very quick. However, we have noticed in some cases with Google that it can take quite a bit of time. And because of that concern, National RTAP did a deep dive webinar on this topic and asking the question, is this right for my agency? How do I deal with all of these clauses and legalese that are required before I can proceed? And while this is just one of the slides from that webinar, we encourage you to review. The link is here and that will be sent to you. And it's a very thoughtful discussion of what are the risks, which is always a nature of a contract, and what are the rewards. And if you are the regional agency that will be supporting your local agency, it's unlikely that you'll be signing that contract. The contract is really between the operator, that transit agency, but you might want to watch that video too, so that you can help answer questions. And while we don't have an attorney on staff at National RTAP, we have heard many of the questions. And if you do find there's something that we might be able to help you with, let us know. And we provide you with a sample of the contract to look it over before beginning this process, but it is a no-cost agreement with Google, and reviewing this video should help you to understand any questions that might come up.
Marcy, if I could just add one more thing.
Please.
Again, keep in mind this licensing agreement, which is something your attorney, your agency's attorney or director, executive director will actually need to sign. This only happens, as far as we know, with Google. And there are many other trip planners, as Marcy said, that are available. So if this becomes a stumbling block for getting your stuff on a trip planner, consider some of the other ones like Apple, Bing, Move It, the transit app. But Google does require a signed agreement. And I think, as she said, that webinar that we did with the attorney, she went through it line by line and really explained what it all meant and what the risks were and really how low they are. So if you have to explain it to someone else, you have a little bit of knowledge if you watch that video or webinar.
And we wanted to make sure there's time for questions today. And so Nancy, I haven't had a chance to monitor the chat.
I'll take a
And
peek.
we can unmute, or a person can unmute themselves, I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, I don't see any questions just yet, but there's not a lot of us. There's only like 20 of us on this meeting. So if you want to unmute yourself and jump in and ask a question, please feel free. We want to make sure that you're returning and you're ready to do some real work next week. We won't be the only ones speaking next week. You'll all be working and a little bit of a classroom situation next week.
Yeah.
Rachel, did you want to jump in?
Oh, sorry, I think I unmuted myself by accident. No questions right now, thanks.
They're on the edge of the counter. They're in a Ziploc bag.
All right, I hear someone speaking who's
One
not.
has everything.
I'm muting all again here. Okay. So we are here to, oh, there's some questions popping up, I think.
Mhm.
Um,
Oh, about schedules where the times are not exact, and that's where you would enter an asterisk, with the idea being at least the first and last entry in the schedule would have to have a real time, but the ones in between, you can put asterisks. Is that correct, Marcy?
Exactly. A trip has to have a start and a location and an end in the location. And those in-between times do not need to be published or included in the GTFS. There's a term used, interpolated, and it's based on time and distance. And so the computer and the trip planner will solve that for you.
So the data will provide, the data that you publish will provide interpolated schedule time for those stops.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So you don't have to do that math. It's a good question. Someone's been playing with the files already, it looks like, because that's a pretty technical question.
And Jared, you had some thoughts. Could you?
Yes, I just wanted to let everyone know that this semester at the local university, there were some engineering and planning students that were taking a transportation course, and I worked with them to start GTFS for another small community. And so they were able to do a lot of these initial steps, getting the latitude and longitude of the stops. And they did that simply by looking at taking the brochure map that the agency had, and then using Google Maps and Google Street View to locate where those stops actually were. and then they put that information into Google Earth, which is free, and then they drew the routes in Google Earth, which was free. So a lot of this, a lot of the GIS or the point and line data was done by them, and then from there I took it and made it usable into a full GTFS. So if you don't know how to get started, it's a good project for students, maybe across the state. If there's not a university close to you, maybe something that a professor would be interested in having their students do.
It's like a good project for a graduate student.
That too.
And I even say high school now, because some of these young people are, from day one using computers and tablets. So yes, at the graduate level, maybe even an undergraduate GIS class. So that's an excellent idea to reach out and see if we can put some hands-on training to those who want to learn more about transportation or are just as passionate as we are about displaying the data. Thank you, Jared, for mentioning. For those of you who've not seen Street View, I'll bring that up on the screen, and you can see out there in Kansas. I'll flip on a display of where a bus stop is, and you can literally see it over at the hospital. So thank you for that reminder. There's always lots of little benefits and experiences here that maybe I don't think about because we're using them all the time. And we'll show them to you as you ask questions. I think Malcolm also had another question about stops that occur in multiple routes. You will only have one latitude and longitude for a shared stop. And so it's important to know that the data set needs to be nice and trim, and you'll be using that same stop code that identifies the shared stop for multiple routes on your list of stops in the schedules generator workbook. And I hope that answers your question, or keep them coming.
Marcy, one thing I think we talked about for next week as you prepare, we do have a little bit of homework for you. So for the route or the portion of the route you'll be building, if you could bring with you either the location, and if you have it, the coordinator for the bus stops along that route, it would be really helpful for developing the GTFS data, and have that on your desktop. So again, you will need to know where approximately the bus stops are located to be successful next week, but you do not have to have the coordinates. If you have them, great, but if not, we will help you with that. But you should at least know that the bus stop, one of the bus stops is located at the southeast corner of Main and North Street, for instance, and then we'll help you identify the coordinates. If you have them already, that's great. Another thing for agencies, you might want to reach out to your RPO. Sometimes they have that data already. So check in, and it might save you a little bit of time next week. Although we want you to walk away next week with the knowledge of how to identify latitude and longitudes for bus stops.
So here is one example where by turning on that Street View, you can see the bus stop, and this is what Nancy is mentioning. You may not know exactly where it is, but you can act without leaving your office, begin to identify where that latitude and longitude is, and then snap that to your My Maps and then capture that latitude and longitude. I will also like to mention that our focus here is primarily to get started on our scheduled bus stops for routes that are published as scheduled routes. National RTAP has developed, in absence of the GTFS Flex being fully functional, an on-demand version of GTFS static, so that riders can see a route and then the passenger must call for a pickup. And we're using this workaround within the current constraints until GTFS Flex is available. In order to publish under GTFS Flex workaround that we have from National RTAP, you will need to develop some sample or standby routes that are places that riders often go, and give those a start time and an end time. And then with a new feature called continuous drop off and continuous pickup, you're not needing to put pins in along the way. The rider would see that the route is there, and then they would call in to dispatch just as they do right now and schedule their door-to-door trip at the time that works for both of them. So National RTAP is making available how to display demand response service within current constraints.
Marcy, any idea when the GTFS Flex will be available?
You know, when we talk to Google about when, they say, we no longer have to give you a date. When it's live, you'll know at that point. So there are quite a few little back-end details, especially if riders have an expectation of clicking a button and literally reaching out to your community action program and seeing if you will be available for that trip in the next 5 to 20 minutes. So I don't know that that's going to come up very soon, but we're all excited when it does. It will certainly allow us to create a service area, and then anywhere within that service area, say that particular provider is available. So we're working toward it. I don't know whether the expectation is to go all the way to booking a trip or not, but there is that intention, and I haven't heard we're 2 to 4 or 6 weeks away, but everybody keeps waiting for it. So maybe that will help us get there sooner.
But in the meantime, we have a great workaround for you, and we'll talk more about that next week.
Next week, we'll detail that for you. Thank you. We're here to answer a few more questions. We have about 6 to 8 more minutes, and I certainly want you to have available our contact information. And while Carrie is not yet an expert on our GTFS data, she is the bigger picture thinker, and so we want you to reach out to her when she can help sort out a vision for this initiative that supports our economic development in rural communities.
Nobody has a question? Well, make sure you have some questions for next week.
Yeah, please do. Or in the chat, can you let us know if you're going to pursue our GTFS builder, or what might hold you back if you don't want to? We're not here to strong arm you, but we'd love to know what you learned today might or might not help you to be inspired for next week.
So Marcy, this is Robin. And if people are wanting to work on this project next week, what are the things that they could do to get ready? What should they have checked into?
Thank you, Robin. We have touched on a few of those. Nancy mentioned asking around. Who might have bus stop locations? Have you done an asset management plan? Did they have to put a pole in that asset management plan? If they did they mark that asset management plan pole or shelter on a map? You might have your latitude and longitude. Do you have software that may only be for on-demand service, but it needs to connect in with the neighboring fixed route service? So there are bus stop locations hopefully somewhere, and you're asking around in the next few days and until next week to gather your bus stops, or at least know where to find them. If you don't have bus stops available, we will help you to secure them and review how to mark them on the map. We'd like you to have your schedule. Some agencies may have your schedule already in an Excel spreadsheet, and we'll show you how to link that Excel spreadsheet into GTFS Builder Schedule Generator. So having your schedule and your stop locations available would be best. And some of those other details about the color of your routes we'll review, but you don't have to answer that next week before you get to class.
Yeah, good question, Robin. So Rebecca Hicks said that she's definitely pursuing this in Roswell. That's great to hear. And she wanted to know if you have to have a website with published routes first before you go live on Google anyways. And you do. Your routes need to be published on your website before Google will allow you to publish on their website. Marcy, is that true for other trip planners besides Google?
As I understand it, they want to be able to ping back or confirm, because they do a quality assurance review as well before they want their name on their product to be related to data that the public is using. So yes, and that gives us a chance to mention that a website builder 3.0 is available from National RTAP. You pretty much put your name and phone number in, and it will almost do all the rest for you. It's not quite that simple, but we have made it very easy for an agency that doesn't yet have their website to make a website available. And in terms of the website having the published routes, perhaps all we need is a PDF of that, a picture on your phone of the schedule, and then that can be attached to or available through your website. But Rebecca, thank you for asking, because sometimes we do have to slow down and make sure that we meet the minimum requirement, which is a published route on your website in order to go live at Google and these other trip planners. But it
Yeah,
doesn't.
and Google will check to make sure that your feed that you're sending them matches that website. So it's really got to be perfect. And actually, one of the spreadsheets that is part of GTFS Builder will allow you to create a schedule. So once you input the data, it's a generated schedule that you can then put back up on your website. So you're absolutely sure that the two match.
Thank you for that reminder, Nancy. It's sort of a back-end offering. And so we can repurpose the data that you generate in the schedule generator as a timetable, and then allow you to organize it and format it the way you want and bring it into Website Builder or your website. So we want this data to be live and useful to you, and it may save you time in the future.
Yeah. One of the last things I wanted to say was for those of you that are with RPOs and you might not actually have transit, you're not running a transit system, you may want to contact between now and next week, contact one of the transit agencies in your area and ask them if it would be okay if you started to develop the GTFS data for them, or just even go to their website and get some information, the scheduling and roughly where the bus stops are. So you have something to work with next week.
And we do have a workbook with sample data in it that you could work with, but I think Carrie and I realized, it's nice to do theoretical things, but it's also nice to get your hands on some data that would be yours. So maybe even just a portion of a trip, 3 or 4 stops. And as Malcolm was asking, do I need all those intermediate times? No, you don't. Just a handful of stop locations and a start and end time. And we'll get you over that hurdle that Jared and I have known through the years for that aha moment, hopefully within next week's hour. We do see someone else from Hobbs Express that's saying New Mexico may go live, or at least is willing to pursue this. And we've actually been able to send them some sample data that had begun a few years ago, and now we'll refresh it. So in the event that you think we might have some data for you, if you've heard somebody had started a project, similar to what Jared mentioned, a student might have started the project and then had to abandon it, try looking for those files. Back to Robin's questions, what do I need before next week? Anything and everything that might have been GTFS in the past that was abandoned, get your hands on it, and we'll refresh it with the new tools that we have for you. I think we might be winding down for today, but we're so excited that you are here and that you'll be available to learn more about trip planning and standardizing your data with us next week. Don't hesitate after we send you the workbook and the guidebook to ask us questions, and we'll be prepared next week to answer that for everyone if we don't get right back to you right away. And Nancy, do you know when this might be available? And if somebody
I'm hoping by Tuesday, we'll have the videos wrapped up and the links in the guidebook to the videos completed, and then we'll send you the whole thing.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And if I could ask questions between now and then, please reach out to us.
And if I could just ask a real quick clarifying question to build off of Rebecca's question, it's still going to be worthwhile to go through the exercise of collecting the data and beginning to use GTFS Builder if your agency has plans to publish the route on the website, but it's not done yet, right? These are things that can happen concurrently. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Carrie. Yes, no reason to slow down getting the GTFS started. It will help you, even if it will need a refresh later when the website goes live.
See you next week on chat, and that's great to see. We look forward to that. Well, Marcy, great job. Thank you so much. Jared, thank you so much for your encouraging words to everybody. And Carrie, of course, thank you for getting this together and making this happen. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, thanks, thanks.
And thank you,
Bye.
Robin. We'll see
Bye-bye.
you all next week.
Yeah,
Bye-bye now.
take care.